Welcome back to another creepy story. This one involves planes, so I hope you don't have a flight anytime soon. Let's begin. I've been flying 737s for 19 years. Not a single incident on my record. Not one. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because it's the only thing about my life right now that still looks clean on paper. 41 years old. Irving, Texas. My apartment is on MacArthur Boulevard, that I've lived in for 2 years and still haven't really moved into. My ex-wife, Dana, she had a whole system for how furniture should sit in a room. Couch facing the window, not the TV. Coffee table slightly off-center because she said centered looked like a waiting room. I always thought that was kind of ridiculous. Then she left and I just kept it exactly how she had it. Every single piece. I don't know why. I told myself it was because I was never home enough to care, which is probably true, but also probably not the whole answer. That's me. Flying used to feel like something. I remember the first time I took a 737 off the ground solo and thought, okay, this is it. This is the thing. That was a long time ago. Now I run checklists the same way I brush my teeth. Automatic. My hands do the work and my brain is somewhere else. Usually thinking about whether I remember to pay my electric bill or what I'm going to eat when I land. It's not bad, exactly. It's just not anything. It was a Tuesday. I don't remember the date offhand. Sometime in March, I think. Late afternoon, heading into evening. Flight 2847. Phoenix Sky Harbor to Dallas Love Field. 143 passengers booked. Almost a full load. My first officer was Kenny Woods, who I'd flown with maybe a dozen times. Good guy. Quiet. He does this thing where he hums old country songs under his breath during cruise and doesn't seem to know what he's doing. I've never mentioned it. We were in the cockpit going through pre-departure. I had my coffee from the Sky Harbor Hudson News because the terminal Starbucks line was 20 people deep and I'm not doing that. It was already getting cold. The boarding process was going fine. I could hear the usual shuffle and settle of it from where I was sitting. The thud of overhead bins. Someone's kid asking a question over and over in that way kids do. 40 minutes into boarding, my headset crackled. Captain Espinoza. It was Paige, one of the gate agents working the flight. I'd seen her around Dallas Love enough times that I knew her name. She had that voice people get when they're trying hard to sound calm. Go ahead, I said. We've got a situation with a passenger. Seat 17F. She paused just a beat too long. He's been sitting there since he boarded and he's not responding to anything. Not moving. He won't answer questions. Flight attendant tried twice. Not responding how? Just sitting there. Eyes open, breathing. But he won't look at anyone. Won't speak. He's not asleep. He's just... She stopped. It's hard to explain. Can you come back? I told her I'd be right there. I handed things off to Kenny for a minute and grabbed my jacket off the back of the seat. Annoyed, if I'm being honest. We were already going to be tight on our push time and this was probably going to be a medical hold, which meant paperwork, which meant a late departure, which meant 43 connecting passengers in Dallas who were going to have a very bad evening. I was running the math in my head before I even stood up. Row 17 is roughly midway back. The cabin was still busy with boarding, people stuffing things into overhead bins, the whole slow shuffle of it. I said excuse me a few times working my way through, and a woman with a tote bag from Trader Joe's stepped aside without looking at me. Seat 17F is the window seat on the right side. The man was middle-aged, maybe mid-50s. Gray suit, the kind that's been dry cleaned a lot, dark hair going silver at the sides. He was sitting completely upright with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes open, aimed at the seat back in front of him, not reading, not on a phone, just sitting. I've seen people zone out on planes. I've seen people in rough shape, medical events, panic attacks, people who've had too much in the airport bar. This wasn't any of those things. I couldn't tell you exactly why I knew that immediately, but I did. I crouched down a little so I was at his eye level. "Sir?" Nothing. I waved my hand once in front of his face, close enough that he should have flinched. He didn't move. His eyes didn't shift. I put 2 fingers to the side of his neck. Pulse was there, steady. His skin was warm, normal temperature. He was breathing, slow and even. Alive in every technical sense of the word. Just not there. I kept my fingers on his neck for another second. The boarding noise kept going around us like nothing was happening. I stood up and keyed my headset. "Paige, call medical, and tell ground ops we're holding push." She didn't argue. That's one thing I've always appreciated about Paige. She reads the room fast, just said, "Copy," and that was it. I stayed in the aisle. I figured I'd wait right there until the paramedics came through the door, because I didn't want anyone else crouching next to the guy and making the situation worse. A flight attendant named Brianna, I'd worked with her maybe twice, came up and asked me quietly what we were doing. I told her we were holding. She nodded and went back toward the galley. I stood there with my arms crossed and waited. The paramedics came on board maybe 8 minutes later. 2 of them. The guy was tall, 6'2" easy. Built like someone who actually used the gym instead of just paying for it. His name was Ricky. Ricky Taylor? It was on his vest. The woman behind him was shorter, ponytail, moved fast. Haley Carlson. She had a medical caduceus tattoo on her right wrist, and she was already pulling on gloves before she got to row 17. I stepped aside and let them in. Ricky crouched down first and did basically the same assessment I'd done, just faster and with better vocabulary. Pen light in the eyes. Checked the pulse. Asked the man his name twice. Nothing. "Okay," Ricky said, not to me, just to himself. He looked at Haley. She was already leaning past him, reaching for the seatbelt buckle. The seatbelt was the Southwest lap belt. Gray webbing. The same one on every seat on every 737 I've ever flown. She got her fingers around the buckle and pressed the release. And the man's mouth opened. His head didn't move. His eyes didn't move. His hands stayed folded in his lap. But his mouth opened. And what came out wasn't a voice exactly. It was flat, even, no breath behind it. The kind of sound that comes out of a speaker, not a throat. The passenger in this seat is currently experiencing a temporary system override. Normal function will resume upon arrival at the scheduled destination. Removal of this passenger prior to arrival will result in permanent cessation of function. She stood up straight and took 1 step back. Ricky didn't move for a second. Then he stood up too. He was staring at the man's face, the way you stare at something when you're trying to figure out if you're being pranked. I got it. I'd had the same reaction for about 2 seconds, then I pushed past it. "Who's speaking?" I said, not a question, just out loud. "This communication is being relayed through the passenger. You may refer to the controlling system as the operator." "The operator." "Correct. The passenger in seat 17F entered into a voluntary agreement prior to boarding. Terms of service were accepted. The flight must proceed as scheduled." Haley looked at me. I looked at Ricky. Ricky was still looking at the man. I took a breath. 19 years of flying teaches you one thing above everything else. When something is wrong with the aircraft, you get the passengers off it. That's the whole move. Every time. Everybody off, I said, loud enough that the rows around us heard me. All passengers need to deplane now. Brianna, delaying or canceling this flight will trigger immediate termination of all 15 contracts. I stopped. Ricky said, 15? 14 additional passengers aboard this aircraft are currently operating in suspended mode. They will resume normal function upon arrival. Any interference with the scheduled departure will result in immediate and permanent cessation of function for all 15 individuals. And I counted them. I didn't want to, but once you know what you're looking for, you can't not see it. They were scattered through the rows, not clustered together, just distributed through the cabin like whoever placed them there was trying to make sure they wouldn't be obvious at first glance. Window seats, middle seats, one aisle, all of them upright, hands in their lap or flat on their knees, eyes open, breathing, but not there. 15 people? Same as the man in 17F. Exactly the same. The voice told us what commute was. I didn't ask a second time. It just explained. Same flat tone, same total lack of anything human behind it. The passenger's mouth was still open. Haley had backed into the aisle. Ricky was standing with his arms slightly out from his sides like he wasn't sure what to do with them. The voice said Commute was a travel service, an app. You downloaded it, agreed to the terms, and on your next eligible flight, the system would take over. Motor function, consciousness, the entire thing. And you'd essentially skip the trip. You'd board it, you would sit, and then you'd arrive. No turbulence, no boredom, no 3-hour watching the seat back screen cycle through movies you've already seen. Just gone and then there. The voice described it like a premium feature. A convenience. It used the phrase, optimized transit experience, without any apparent awareness of how that sounded. Ricky said, that's not real. The voice didn't respond to that. I asked if it was legal. The voice said the service operated under existing framework agreements with partner carriers, that all users had consented via terms of service prior to activation, and that any interference with contracted transport constituted a violation of user agreements and applicable service laws. It mentioned something about binding arbitration. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. Haley looked at me, I looked at Haley, that was it. I keyed my headset and asked to be patched through to the tower. Bo Alvarado picked up fast, that part I remember clearly. I barely finished identifying myself before he was already talking. He knew, that's the thing. He already knew what I was about to say. He used the word commute before I did. He said it like he was slightly tired of the conversation, which meant he'd had it before, or had been expecting it, or both. He said Southwest Corporate was aware of the service, said several carriers had existing partnership agreements, said that the 15 passengers aboard had paid for premium guaranteed transport and that their contracts were binding on both sides, including the airline side. I told him the passengers were unresponsive, that they looked like they were in some kind of suspension, that a paramedic was standing in my aisle looking like he'd just seen something he wasn't going to put in a report. Bo said the condition was temporary, expected, and consistent with disclosed service parameters. I said, Bo? He said, Espinoza, I need you to fly your scheduled route. There was a pause, not a long one. Just enough. That is a direct order, he said. Corporates signed off. Get your push cleared and get these people to Dallas. I stood there for a second with the headset against my ear and the cabin noise around me. Someone 2 rows back shifting in their seat, the air conditioning doing its thing. A kid near the front asking his dad what was taking so long. Normal sounds. Completely normal sounds. I told Bo I'd get back to him. He started to say something else, and I clicked off. Kenny looked up when I came back through the cockpit door. I sat down, pulled my door closed, and just sat for a second. Then I told him. All of it. The app, the 15 passengers, what the voice said about consequences. Kenny listened without interrupting, which wasn't like him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. I've heard of it, he said. Commute. Guy I flew with out of Denver mentioned it a few months back. Said business travelers were using it. Said that it was getting popular. I looked at him. I thought he was messing with me, Kenny said. He looked disturbed. That's the right word. Not panicked, not skeptical anymore. Just disturbed. He was turning his pen over in his hand. This black Pilot G2 he always kept in his left breast pocket, just flipping it end to end. I told him corporate had cleared us to proceed. He said, okay, in a way that meant it wasn't okay. I thought about refusing. Genuinely thought about it. Sat there with my hands in my lap and ran through it. I could call Bo back. I could refuse the departure. I could get everyone off the plane and let Southwest and Commute and their binding arbitration sorted out on the ground where I wasn't responsible for it. And then I thought about what the voice said. Permanent cessation of function. 15 people. I didn't know if it was real. I still don't know if it was real. But I wasn't willing to find out. I reached forward and started the engines. The familiar vibration came up through the seat, through the floor, through everything. I'd felt it 1,000 times. I taxied us out toward runway 13 left, and I kept my eyes on the center line and I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't need to. I knew what was back there. 15 people sitting upright with their hands in their laps and their eyes open, and none of them knowing they were on a plane at all. The runway lights stretched out ahead of us in 2 straight lines. I kept moving. The flight was fine. That's the thing. Smooth air all the way to Dallas. No turbulence, nothing. The kind of flight where you barely touch the controls and the autopilot does everything, and you're basically just a very expensive babysitter for a machine that doesn't need you. 32,000 feet, a few scattered clouds below us. Visibility clear in every direction. Perfect conditions. Kenny doesn't say much. He stopped flipping the pen somewhere over Abilene and just put it back in his pocket and stared at the instruments. I kept pulling up the cabin camera. There's a small screen on the center console, down and to the right. It cycles through a few angles. I don't usually watch it during cruise. There's nothing to see. People on their phones, people sleeping, people arguing quietly about the armrest. Normal stuff, but I kept pulling it up anyway. Every few minutes, I couldn't stop. 14 of the 15 suspended passengers were visible depending on the angle. They just sat there, upright, hands in laps, eyes open, not blinking much. And around them, everyone else was completely normal. A guy in row 14 had his laptop out and was watching something, earbuds in, occasionally laughing at whatever it was. A woman across the aisle from one of the suspended passengers was doing her nails, which, I don't know, seems optimistic for an airplane, but okay. Nobody looked at the frozen people next to them like anything was wrong. One guy in row 22 was asleep against the window, head at that impossible angle people get, and there was a suspended passenger sitting directly in his eye line in the middle seat, perfectly still, with eyes open, and the sleeping guy had just sort of accepted that as part of the scenery. That part got to me a little. I kept thinking about where they were, the 15 of them. Their bodies were on my plane. I could see them on the camera. But whatever made them people, whatever it was usually running behind their eyes, that was somewhere else, or nowhere, or nothing. I didn't know which one was worse. If they were somewhere, experiencing something, then what? What do you experience when a machine parks your consciousness in a buffer? Is it dark? Is it nothing like dreamless sleep? Or is it something you can't describe because there's no language for it yet? And if it's nothing, if they just stop existing for 2 hours and then start again, I don't know what to call that. I'm not a philosopher. I fly planes. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Kenny noticed me pulling up the camera for the 5th or 6th time. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the screen, then looked back out the windshield. "I know," I said. He nodded. We started the descent into Dallas around 10:40. Love Field was clear, wind out of the south at 8 knots. Nothing complicated. I flew the approach myself, didn't use the auto land. I don't know why exactly, it just felt like I should be the one doing it. We touched down on runway 31 left. Smooth landing actually, one of my better ones. I don't know why I remember that. We got to the gate, jetway came up, and I heard the forward door open. I pulled up the cabin camera one more time. All 15 of them woke up at exactly the same moment. Not close to the same moment, the same moment. I watched it happen. Their eyes went from blank to focused in about 2 seconds. Then their shoulders dropped, like something had been holding them up and let go. A couple of them looked around. One woman put her hands to her forehead. A man in a window seat blinked a few times and reached for his carry-on like he'd just been sitting there normally the whole time. They moved into the deplaning lane. They grabbed their bags from the overhead. They walked off the plane. I watched every single one of them go. None of them looked confused for more than about 10 seconds. Like waking up from a nap in a familiar place. They knew where they were. They knew where they were going. They just didn't know they'd been gone. I filed the report that afternoon from a Marriott Business Center off Mockingbird Lane because my laptop was in a bag in the hotel room and I didn't feel like going back up. Incident form plus a written narrative. I described everything: the voice, the threat, the 15 passengers, the simultaneous waking, all of it. I'm not great at writing those, but I was thorough. Took me about an hour. Southwest responded the next morning. It was about 4 paragraphs. The short version was that Commute held a valid operating license, that passengers had an established right to use consciousness suspension technology under the Digital Transit Autonomy Act of 2022, which I had never heard of, and that the airline's liability was limited to physical transport of the passenger's body, which had been delivered intact and on schedule. The response mentioned binding arbitration twice. It said my concerns were noted. That was the whole thing. Concerns noted. I looked up Commute that night from my hotel bed. Found it immediately. App Store, 4.8 stars, 9 million downloads. The reviews were mostly business travelers. Things like, "Finally, business travel that doesn't waste my time," and "Landed feeling completely rested. Will never fly any other way." One person gave it 3 stars because the app UI was confusing, not because of anything else. The terms of service were long. I read the whole thing. It took about 40 minutes. The relevant section was under a subheading called Service Activation and Neural Transfer Parameters. Motor control was transferred to a distributed neural network during the activation window. Consciousness was suspended in what they called a buffer state, described as a temporary non-experiential hold. Non-experiential. So it was nothing. They just stopped. For the whole flight, they were just not there. 9 million downloads. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for a while. The air conditioning in the room was loud. There was a street noise from somewhere outside, probably Lemon Avenue. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, I opened my laptop and drafted a resignation letter to Southwest Airlines. It took me about 10 minutes. 19 years and it took me 10 minutes. I kept it simple. I said I was resigning my position as captain effective immediately, and that I wished the company, well, I didn't explain. I figured they'd understand. Or they wouldn't, and neither outcome was going to change anything. I sat there for a moment, looking at it. Then, I hit send.